Hello, my name is Nicholas Robb, and today I'm going to be giving a podcast loosely based off of the argumentative essay that I wrote earlier in the semester that was based on tribal courts and a push for complete tribal sovereignty in the native reserves throughout the United States. And I'm here today with my counterpart, Brody Rosen. I'll let him introduce himself here.
Hi, my name is Brody Rosen. I'm a senior down here in Kansas City. I attend Park Hill High School, and I'm actually a hopeful Wichita State Shocker going into next year. My entire debate case this high school year has been talking about tribal sovereignty. I've spent hours researching the topic, and I feel like I know a lot about it to provide some helpful insight.
When talking about the issue of tribal sovereignty, there are some key issues that need to be addressed and some definitions that need to be gave so everyone can have an adequate understanding of what is about to be talked about. So first of all, tribal sovereignty. What is tribal sovereignty? So it refers to the right of the native tribes to be able to govern themselves without a lot of intervention from the federal government. Tribal sovereignty is something that we're going to be referencing a lot throughout the remainder of this podcast. And something else that's going to be continuously referenced is the 1978 Supreme Court case, Oliphant versus Suquamish.
So what exactly was that case about?
Well, I'm glad you asked, Brody. The Oliphant versus Suquamish Supreme Court case is in regards to a man who stepped onto a native reserve and committed a crime. The crime that was committed was assaulting a police officer. So the police officer went to go and detain this man and place him under arrest, but Oliphant, the offender, believed that the tribal police force had no jurisdiction over him because he was a non-native. So Oliphant felt like he should not have been tried by the native police force, and he should have, in fact, be tried by the federal government. So this lawsuit took its way up the flagpole until it reached the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled in heavy favor of Oliphant. So me and Brody are on the side of believing that these native reservations should have the right to full tribal sovereignty. We believe that they are 100% able of governing their own land without any intervention from the federal government. So what can be done to fix this such unjust policy?
That's actually a pretty loaded question. As much as Nick and I would like the Supreme Court to just overturn the original decision, they can't due to a thing called the right of certiorari.
So what is the right of certiorari?
Good question. The right of certiorari basically says that when a Supreme Court rules on a case or a decision, they can't go back and overturn it. If they were to do that, it would completely kind of destroy the overall idea of the Supreme Court as it is, because of the highest court in the land. There'd be no reason for them to go back and make a decision.
Yeah, I think it would be pretty hypocritical if it was just that easy to go in and overturn a Supreme Court case.
Right, it destroys all legitimacy of the Supreme Court.
Yeah, it threatens the integrity of the highest court of our land. So, Brody, you've done a lot of research on this as well. What can be done to overturn such an unjust policy in the United States?
Right, so like I said earlier, it's not as easy as just overturning the original case. What would actually have to happen in order to quote-unquote overturn the original decision, there would have to be a similar or exact same case brought to the Supreme Court that could then be overturned.
So, I know you want to be a lawyer and you're looking into some law schools, and so what would a perfect case look like to be able to overturn something like this? Would it have to be almost a carbon copy, or could it be something just in the same general realm?
This is great because it actually just has to be like in the same general realm. If someone commits a crime on any kind of tribal land and they sue that tribe because they shouldn't have been arrested, they believe they shouldn't have been arrested because they're not native, and the Supreme Court rules in favor of the tribe, then that right there nullifies the entire 1978 decision, and we're back to where we want to be.
Yeah. Also, I can only imagine giving the tribal sovereignty back to these nations, how it would lighten up the workload of the American court system so much, because it would allow them to have their own trials and be able to try the people who commit the crimes in their own land, which is sadly frequently non-natives.
Right. What Nick said is exactly true. Right now in the status quo, what has to happen in order for a non-native to be tried for committing a crime on native land, the tribal courts have to submit an appeal to the U.S. federal government saying that, hey, this crime is committed on our land. Please come and try this non-native person. The problem with that is that the United States federal government has bigger fish to fry. A lot of these cases go untouched because they just simply don't have time to get to them. That's where the problem arrives today. And by getting a decision that would nullify the previous decision would completely take that workload off the U.S. federal government and give more responsibility to the tribal courts, which is what we want.
Yeah, it really seems like the tribal courts are underutilized. They're not being able to use their full potential and help as much as they can because they're only allowed to try the natives of their own land, which is not a large population of the United States. So, Brody, we've both done a lot of time researching studies and all this stuff. Is there some real concrete evidence that shows this?
Right. What we have to understand is that the crimes being committed by non-natives, it's not petty theft or speeding tickets. These are serious crimes that deserve hefty jail time. Currently, right now, 85% of Native women experience some sort of sexual abuse or domestic abuse by non-Native people, right? And the number of women that actually get justice for this right now is at around 40%. So we're seeing that under half of the people that are being like having these crimes committed against them aren't seeing justice. A really easy and simple way to have justice served is to give tribal sovereignty back to these reservations in order to allow them to actually try these non-natives that commit these crimes.
Yeah, I remember coming across something like this when I was doing my research for my essay. In 2018, there was a Seattle based Urban Health Institute that put out a survey. And the survey found that 5,712 Native American women went missing, and the sad part was only 116 of whom were registered in the Department of Justice database. So, using data from 71 urban cities, which the Seattle Urban Health Institute did, we can see that thousands of indigenous women have simply been ignored. These sad statistics are now becoming widely known as more studies take place. With more and more publications continuing to come out, it's becoming clear that this is a major issue and a real problem going on in these tribal communities, and there just simply needs to be some change. Allowing the Native Americans to be able to try non natives should no longer be a question. Action needs to be taken. Not being able to prosecute those who commit wrongdoings on your own land is simply immoral and goes against what America stands for. It is immoral and just needs to be changed. So, as we can see, this is such a glaring issue in our society. Brody, why do you think this issue isn't as talked about as other such issues in the United States?
The sad truth is that no one really cares. For years, we've ignored the problems of Native Americans and like tribal sovereignty, and just now is actually finally starting to be some light shed on these problems. And even then, it's not on a huge scale like other problems have been. You would think this is a bigger problem than it is.
So, what would an accurate timeline look like, you think, before we can actually get some justice put forward for these tribal nations?
Pretty much as soon as a case is brought to the Supreme Court that the decision could nullify the 1978 case, that like that minute right there is when things would change. Right now, there's not a timetable for that because there isn't a current Supreme Court case that actually get there.
Yeah, and what needs to be done is when eventually, inevitably, when a case like this comes forward, we need to do our part as citizens of America to push this case into the mainstream media so people can support it, and we can actually start finding some change and helping out these Native Americans. And currently, the political climate that we're in, we can see in these past 6 to 8 months that the power of social media is strong. And so when a court case does inevitably come forward, we need to do our best to promote this and get it into the light so we can start making a change.
Another great reason to support this cause is because of laws like Oliphant versus Squamish being modern day colonization. Right now, the United States federal government recognizes all native land and native reservations as sovereign land, right? They have the right to govern themselves. However, for some reason, they seem to draw a line in the area of criminal justice. So for me, it's kind of like ironic how the United States federal government comes out and openly says that, hey, like these people are sovereign to govern themselves, but then refuses to let them do so in the area of criminal justice, which might be the most important area of sovereignty.
Yeah, I also think it's pretty ironic that as a country, we pretty much pride ourselves on being pretty progressive amongst other countries in the world, but we have such a weird, outdated law like this in place that's still being enforced to this day. I just think it's crazy.
Exactly. It's been since 1978 that like the federal government has even had a discussion about this kind of thing. Of course, it's outdated. It's time for change. If we're going to be progressive in other areas, we need to be progressive in all areas.
This is just one of those things that you really can't argue against. I mean, there's just no reason why you shouldn't support such a just cause.
And I want to go back and touch on what Nick said about lightening the workload of the United States federal government. Let's keep in mind that the stats don't lie. Remember what Nick said about how there's 5,712 missing Native American women, and only 116 of those were actually registered in the Department of Justice database. The DOJ, that's a U.S. federal government entity, right? They only got track of 116 of them, not the 5,712. Clearly, they have other things to worry about, and clearly they're backed up.
And yeah, those statistics just do not lie. The U.S. court system is backed up and has better things to do. And quite frankly, the best laxative is going to be pushing for complete tribal sovereignty towards these native reservations. In conclusion, giving these tribes the right to prosecute those who break the law on the land that they're supposed to be governing in the first place is the only plausible outcome. there is really no loser in doing something like this. It would help minimize the workload on our police and our court systems, and it would also lead to a much safer America. Thank you for your time and listening. I hope we made some good points for you to sit and think about. Thank you, Brody, for coming on and adding your insight. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. I always love talking about this kind of stuff.
Thank you. Have a good one.